Welcome along to 98 Not Out. This week, our guest is Mr. Paul Newman, the chief cricket writer from the Daily Mail. We're going to be talking England, we're going to be talking the counties, lots to catch up on. Should Joe Root survive? Who should replace him? Anyway, before we get into it, remember, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and let's get into it. Here's Paul Newman. England's miserable run of series defeats continues, and it's kind of deja vu. We spoke to Paul Newman after the sackings of Chris Silverwood and when Ashley Giles stood down as well. And at that time, it was being touted as the Red Bull reset. And here we are a couple of months later. It's got from bad to worse. So we're catching up with Paul, who's just about to get on a plane back from Grenada. But as we can see from the video, it looks like there's a bit of a Caribbean backdrop to where he is. Morning, Paul. How are you?
Morning, Darren. I'll just show you a bit of Grenada there before we get going. There we are. Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. Yeah, it's been a miserable Test match here, hasn't it? I'm afraid for England. Another series without winning, as you say. That's 5 on the trot now, where they haven't won, which is one of their worst runs of all time, and only 1 win in 17 Test matches, and that's pretty grim, isn't it? I'm old enough to remember the bad old days of the 80s and 90s before central contracts, and I'm afraid this is worse now. Those first couple of tests were okay, played on very flat pitches. You know, it was possible to see some green shoots of recovery from England. It was possible to cut them some slack, but I'm afraid when the pressure was on and the series was there for the winning in the third test here in Grenada, then it all just fell apart, both in the field and with the bat, and that was pretty miserable to watch, I'm afraid.
Do you think there would have been a different outcome if Mark Wood and Ollie Robinson been fit, and even if Jofra Archer had been part of this? Would we be having a different conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that they would have been a lot better in the Ashes as well. You know, so much of their Ashes challenge was based on the pace of Wood and Archer and Ollie Stone as well. And losing Jofra is obviously a huge blow, and losing Woody was a huge blow in the middle of the first test as well. On that one, I mean, I gather that he had an injection in his elbow before he came out on this tour, where he was experiencing some pain in it. And you could point to the fact that he was over bowled in Australia once the Ashes were lost. He did most of his bowling in Australia after Australia had already won the Ashes. So you do think that might have been self-inflicted as well, I'm afraid, by England and by poor management of Woody. Ollie Robinson is a very frustrating one. There's clearly an extremely talented bowler there. We saw in Hobart him have back problems and they get a public warning from the bowling coach, John Lewis, over the general state of his fitness. Clearly it's taking time for him to adjust to the highest level in terms of what's needed. But it was a huge blow, and I'm beginning to wonder whether it was slightly psychological as well, because in the build-up to he had this back spasm. That's what we were told it was in the warm-up game in Antigua that ruled him out of the first test. We were told it came too soon. Then he looked to be bowling perfectly well in practice before Barbados. Then there was some sort of setback before Barbados, and the same thing happened in Grenada. So I'm wondering whether it's psychological now, whether Ollie perhaps is frightened of breaking down in another test, because he knows how bad that would look and how bad it would be for his career. But what he's got to do now is go back to county cricket and play in a run of matches to prove that he can last the pace, and he is fit enough, because there is a really talented bowler there, and his absence was again a blow in this series. But you have to say, you know, the biggest problem is batting collapses, and it's still batting collapses, even though they scored runs on the flat pitches of Antigua and Barbados. They still came tumbling down with a series of poor shots on that sort of ill-fated third day of the final test, after they've been shown the way to do it by West Indies Joshua De Silva. Just good old-fashioned application and determination, and England just couldn't do that.
And the trouble is, you know, we just mentioned Wood and Archer. You know, our batting has not been blown away in either series, Ashes or the West Indies, by raw pace. You know, you look at Boland in Australia and you look at Mayers in the West Indies. They're not quick. They're the international equivalent of medium pace trundlers, and yet they're still knocking us over.
Absolutely, I couldn't believe Carl Mayers. I mean, you know, 29-year-old in his 11th test, he looked like a journeyman. He looked like a modern day Mark Elam for those people old enough to remember him. And he just came, as you say, little more than medium, trundling in. And he had ridiculous figures of 5 for 9 at one stage. And it just isn't good enough, really. That just is a serious concern that a bowler like that is taking wickets against England. And we're seeing England players playing some terrible shots time and time again. We're seeing Zach Crawley. Okay, Zach Crawley didn't get out to Mayers, but he keeps on getting out to booming drives. And there's so much talent there, but it's got to be applied as well. And to get the game management of England's better players is just not good enough. Johnny Bairstow had a really bad quality. He's got a great century in Antigua, and it looked like it was suiting him at 6. And okay, he's been messed around. He's got a regular role now, but he was not nearly as good after that century. Obviously, the captain is the exception to this. Joe Root scored two centuries in the first 2 tests. Looked as good as ever, truly world class. But he failed twice, both to Myers in that last game. And I think he might be a player, a bit like Alistair Cook, who actually is better against proper pace, proper test bowling, and against a sort of Darren Stevens type figure. I call him Mark Egan, now I call him Darren Stevens. It just both wasn't Ken. Joe's. Yeah, both Ken bowlers. Yeah, it just wasn't. It wasn't Joe's sort of game. But no blame can be attached to Joe, the batsman, that's for sure. But you're right, Paul. These are and Scott, going back to Scott Boland and others of that ilk. These are not bowlers that should be bowling out the England Test side, and that's one of the biggest reasons why we're bottom of the World Test Championship now.
Seems to be a question of mentality, certainly where the batting is concerned. What can be done to address that? Is that a case of a new innovative coach coming in to just try and do that? Or do you think it should be, at this level, people should have that anyway? I can't quite get my head around what needs to be done.
But they should have it at this level anyway. But it is a question of mindset, isn't it? And we've seen so much of the domestic game now be about the white ball, and that was obviously gloriously fulfilled. That policy that came in 2015 with the 2019 World Cup. But it has to change now, because Test cricket is still so important to us as a nation. So many people love it. So many people have been here in their thousands, watching it. It shows how important it still is. I'm afraid the whole first-class structure has been undermined, hasn't it, in recent years? People say the 100 only came in last year. Well, the ECB have been obsessed with it for years. And I think a lot of our players are in that white ball mentality. There doesn't seem to be the patience in our game. I mean, we just saw patience from the West Indies, didn't we? I mean, it wasn't thrilling, but the way Craig Brathwaite batted in Barbados, he batted for hours and hours and hours, barely played a loose shot. And this is something that our players who've got more natural talent than Brathwaite, not knocking him at all. He showed an incredible display of concentration. Barely played a full shot, but he barely played a memorable one either. It wasn't scintillating cricket by any means, but it was what was needed. The West Indies ground down England over those first 2 tests, and then applied the killer punch in the third when when the series was up for grabs. And I think Darren, as you say, it is mentality. It's our whole mindset. Someone like Zach Crawley is definitely talented enough to be a seriously good Test class batsman. We saw it when he scored a double 100 against Pakistan, and we saw it when he scored 100 here. But he plays these silly shots, which we just suggest that he's not of the right mindset. And we saw it with Ollie Pope before they dropped him. And one thing I would say is Essex's Dan Lawrence looked terrific. He had a difficult third test as well when the ball moved, but you would say that he came out with a lot of credit from this series. And one of the plus points, number 4 is Essex position. I think it may be one too high for him at test level, because he's going to get those moving pitches that undone him in the third test. But he showed a really refreshing mentality. He managed to combine his attack with a defence that's needed at this level as well. So there were encouraging points, but as a collective, the batting just is not in the right mindset. Maybe a very good coach will do something about that. I think it is time for a disciplinarian. It's time for an Andy Flower or a Duncan Fletcher. It's time for someone to get hold of this team and say, come on, you're not the worst in the world. It's what Duncan Fletcher said to Nasser Hussain in 1999. We're not the worst in the world. We're much better than that. We may not be the best in the world, but we've got to be better than this. And I think it goes back to the whole ethos of the first class system and the domestic cricket and what we're trying to achieve, really.
No better time to deliver that message than when you're bottom of the rankings, is there?
absolutely. It is very similar to 1999 when Nasser and Duncan took over, I think, in that, you know, they're at rock bottom. The only way is up. And maybe they were taking baby steps in the first two tests, but we were lulled into a full sense of optimism there, I think, by the pitches. And this really is as bad as it gets, because we're so well resourced now, aren't we? The resources England have got, they had a nutritionist here for the first test, and the sort of thing West Indies can only dream about. I mean, West Indies have an English chief executive, Johnny Grave, and he was talking to us about the resources that England have in comparison. England, apart from India, England have got the best resources in the world, you know, the amount of support staff they have. And that's all come from TV money and central contracts and what have you. But now that it seems to have turned full circle. And while our white ball cricket is brilliant, we've seen the real extent of how bad our test cricket is now. And we have to address it, because test cricket is too important. And if that means making some sacrifices to the white ball game again, then so be it. Because if you look at the schedules as well in the next 2 years, there's an extraordinary amount of cricket. Paul Collingwood, the interim coach, called it horrific the other day, because they're playing COVID catch-up. They're not given an inch on any cricket that was meant to be played, you know, during the pandemic. So something's got to give, really. And I think it's going to have to be two pretty separate teams from now on. And there's not going to be too many multi-format players, because they've got to concentrate on their test cricket. They've got to concentrate on getting better, and let the white ball team go off and do what they continuing to still do very well. And that might be one thing we've got to do. Certainly in terms of the coaches, I think there'll be a test coach and a one-day coach after this. And that will hopefully start the recovery as well.
We need England players playing more county cricket, particularly the test players, like in the old days when you and I were youngsters, Paul, where if you weren't playing for England, you went back to your county and played county championship. That seems to have tailed off the last few years, but I think that can only be a good thing if they're encouraged to play as much red ball as possible. Is that a possibility, do you think?
Well, the problem, Darren, is there's so much international cricket, isn't there? It's fitted into the calendar. It's a possibility if they're going to play first-class cricket only. I mean, we've seen Stuart Broad and Jimmy Anderson, you know, the two bowlers whose names are not meant to be mentioned out here. You know, we've seen them only play Test cricket for the last 4 or 5 years, and that has helped their bodies considerably, and that has helped their workload considerably. And they have played a bit of county cricket, maybe not too much because they're bowlers and they have to be protected. And I know that can go down badly with traditionalists, but I do think when you look at the injury records of the bowlers in the past, and you see how much county cricket, you know, the Darren Goffs and the Angus Frasers played, you would have wanted them to play more of their cricket for England. Now things have changed considerably. In an ideal world, yes, they'd have a good warm up before the first test. They'd play 4 or 5 first-class games, but of course they're at the wrong time of the year as well, as it stands at the moment, aren't they? You know, the season starts next week. Pitches are not going to be anything like we've seen in the Caribbean. So it's a question of the right sort of preparation as well, and the right sort of matches. I think it would be a good thing if it's possible, but with the current calendars and itineraries, unless you're playing Test cricket only, I think it's going to be difficult to achieve.
You mentioned the elephant in the room about Stuart Broad and Jimmy Anderson, and selection was also another factor of England's winter, both in Australia and very clearly in the Caribbean. Do you think we just need to start from scratch again and look beyond the current sort of crop, or who needs to get a grip of selection to try and make it more workable?
Well, Andrew Strauss is in the middle of this high performance review, isn't he? He's setting that up for the ECB, and we're hearing, you know, a few things that might be coming out of that. I think one thing that he will do is go back to having a national selector. I think they'll get rid of this system where the head coach had responsibility for selection, and poor old Chris Silverwood had far too much on his hands there, particularly when a pandemic came along as well. It just wasn't feasible for him to be on top of selection and coaching both the white ball and the red ball side. So I think we are going to go back to rip it up and start again, really, and go back to where we were. One of the things that's going to come out of this review will be maybe a head coach with overall responsibility sitting over assistant coaches, one for Test cricket, one for white ball cricket, with having a national selector again, I think. And that can only be a good thing. And someone, you know, Ed Smith was sacked because he didn't get on well with the players, really. Well, I'm sorry. You know, the players are going to have to put up with an independent voice. They're going to have to put up with someone coming in from the outside, because the sort of bubble, the cozy bubble, as it were, is not working. And I felt for Chris Silverwood. I think he was given far too much on his plate. And you know, it took 2 years out from the Ashes. He was talking absolutely the right game about hitting them with pace, about getting Jofra there, making sure he managing his workload to get him there fit. Same with Woody, same with Ollie Stone. And it just didn't work out because of injuries, because of the pandemic, and what was a well-intentioned rest and rotation policy, but in practice, sorry, it wasn't fit for purpose. So yes, I think we'll go back. We'll go around in circles really, but we'll go back to what we used to have. And that can only be a good thing, really, an independent voice looking at selection. I'm not saying there are a lot of better players out there that are not being picked. That's the thing. You know, you can only look around at the lack of captaincy alternative to realise that there's not a huge amount of talent out there that's not in the England setup. It's getting the best out of what they have got and appreciating that they're much better players than they're showing.
Big debate this week about the captaincy and Joe Root. If you believe the media and all that's been said, it looks like it's the end of Joe Root's days as captain. But looking beyond that, alternatives seem to be few and far between, unless you go completely left field. Now, I've seen you've put forward the name of Sam Billings as a possible alternative should Joe step aside.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that's perfect, Darren, by any means. I'm not saying that's the answer, but I think it does sum up where we're at in terms of lack of alternatives. Now, we need to say that Joe Root is a fantastic person, a great role model, and one of the best batters England have ever had. So, but that doesn't mean that he's a great captain, and it doesn't mean he should carry on now. I mean, I think he only survived the Ashes when everybody else was being sacked because there were no viable alternatives as captain. And we've seen again here that I'm afraid he was found wanting as a captain when the pressure was on, when they needed to get the last 2 West Indies wickets on that third morning. He was completely bereft of inspiration, imagination, energy. It was just naive tactics in the extreme to let the Silver get up to 100 and get West Indies get up to a match-winning lead. And that was Joe's captaincy in a nutshell. So, excuse me, I do think he needs to be replaced. Needs to either stand down or be told he's got to go. He's had over 5 years at it, and the sad truth is England are going backwards rather than forwards. So it's not a good enough reason to say there's nobody else. I'm afraid we have to find somebody else. Now, the obvious one is Ben Stokes, of course. He's the vice captain. He's the best player. Best all-round player. He's got a great cricket brain. He would command the respect of the team and all the rest of it. But I just think it would be too much. I just think it would be far too much for someone who's so important, such a talisman, and someone who does everything at 100 miles an hour. I think he would throw himself into it so much that he would break. You know, like we saw with Botham, Flintoff, other all-rounders before him. Also, we have to remember this is a guy who was taking a break for his mental health not too long ago.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm happy to say he looks in a good place here. He looks much more like his old self. He was terrific with that 100 in Barbados. He bowled his heart out when he was not meant to be doing much bowling at all because of a side strain. But that rather makes the point, I think, that he would do everything possible. He would end up doing all the bowling, all the batting. I don't think he'd like the sort of rounds of media interviews and everything that comes with it that goes with the captaincy. Now, that's not that important in the general scheme of things, but it is a factor. So I just think it would be a mistake to give it to Ben. I know there are a lot of good judges, including Nasser, who think that Ben is the best choice. And in some ways, he's the only choice. But I think you've just got to go outside of that. And I've seen Stuart Broad as a short-term solution. Yes, possibly, but we play 7 tests this summer. Would he be fit enough to play all of them? And you want your captain to play every game. So I think looking at it, I think James Vince has got some merit, even though he's not been able to fully hold down an England place. But he has got leadership experience. I've seen Tom Abel as a real left field county option. Now, I don't know enough about him really, except to see that he's got a batting average of 30. By all accounts, he's a first-class batting average of 30. By all accounts, he's a good man, maybe a bit of a Sergeant Major type, which may be needed. But for me, the best choice is Sam Billings. Now, that may seem odd for someone who's just played 1 test. He came and played at Hobart in an emergency. But I think he's got something about him. He's got leadership experience. He's got a good, bubbly, infectious positive personality. And also, I think that he could fit into the team as the keeper and 7 batsmen, because Ben Foakes had a poor series out here, really, I'm afraid. I'm a big fan of Ben Foakes, but he didn't take his opportunity with either bat or the very highest level with the gloves that we know he's capable of. So that makes him slightly vulnerable again. Now, in an ideal world, he would get a home summer. He's not played a home summer, but he probably will get that. But but I think that is a way where you could bring in Sam Billions, and I just think that's the best of some very limited options.
Now, as you mentioned before, we are on the cusp of the domestic cricketing summer. They've made certain changes to the, I don't want to say moving deck chairs on the Titanic, but the summer just looks like it's not going to do us any favours, either at county level or national level, let alone club level. But let's just talk about county cricket for a moment. What are your thoughts looking forward to 2022 and what it means for the counties?
Well, it is pretty much as it was, isn't it, really? There's a couple more matches in the middle of summer, but if we're serious about improving our first-class cricket, improving our test cricket, we have to change this. We can't have so many matches being played in April and May and then so many in September. It's not the right time conducive to producing test batsmen, producing spin bowlers, and one of our big weaknesses. So it has to change. Now, to be fair, I think it is in the process of being changed. This Strauss-led high-performance review will look at the whole structure. It's going to come up with some pretty radical suggestions, I think, and some of those might not go down well, again, with traditionalists, but I think we do have to look at them. I'm a believer in the 18-county system. I very much am. I think there are 18 academies to produce talent, but there are some people who feel it's too many, and that also that the 100 was a first step in producing these sort of super clubs, 8 or 10 super clubs, and the rest fall by the wayside. Now, if that's going, does it need to be as radical as that? Well, we shall see. Hopefully not. But I do think things are going to change for the 2023 season, and the proposals, excuse me, will be on the table by the end of this summer. So for this summer, I don't see too much changing. But I do think we're in for big change moving forward. We've changed a lot over the years, haven't we? And we've had these ups and downs. But the bottom line is we've only been #1 test side in the world for about a year in the last however long, whereas Australia consistently do it, and they're consistently good at white ball cricket as well. So it can be done. The fact is that there's far more cricket played in England, which perhaps doesn't help in that regard. And we're the only Northern Hemisphere test side, so obviously we play all year round as well, which perhaps doesn't help. There's not any proper rest time for a lot of our best players. But I think big change is coming, and it's change that could cause a lot of disquiet and trepidation amongst some people in the domestic game, some good people in the domestic game. But I'm trying to keep an open mind, and I'm trying to just look at anything that is put on the table rationally and see where it takes us. Because if we don't improve things, our test cricket and all test cricket will die. And I know we've been saying that for generations, and it's still. But there's still like 10,000 English people come to Barbados to watch a test match. So there is still a huge interest and love for it. But there could be some difficulties ahead to put that right.
Here's one out the back of the hand at you. We're going to whiz forward. The year is 2032. What is the game of cricket looking like?
Well, it's quite early in the morning here, Darren. I don't know, that's going to make my head. That's going to make my head. I've got up early for you guys, but that's going to make my head spin. That one, 2032. Well, I've long thought to myself, I really want to watch cricket in my retirement. I've been blessed and fortunate enough to have a job that involves watching cricket all around the world, but it does bring a different sort of mentality to it, because it's your work as well. And what I want very much is to enjoy my retirement watching good cricket with a glass of wine and good company, and just doing things that I've not been able to do for the last 15 and 20 years. And for that, I want it to be first class cricket. I want it to be test cricket. I'm not, I love white ball cricket. I've thoroughly enjoyed 2020. As I've said before, and I say again, I think the 100 was unnecessary, and I think the 100 is going to be a big step towards destroying the cricket we love. I do fear that so we're talking 10 or 11 years time, aren't we? 10 years time. I do fear that Test cricket may be struggling by then. I hope I'm wrong. I do think cricket has got a lot going for it. Cricket found a short form that fits into the modern world and is enjoyed by modern people, by young people. So I think there's going to be a lot more of that. I just hope that there is still Test cricket. I hope there is first class cricket, and that it's not entirely a diet of white ball. I'd like to. I hope in 10 years' time we won't be seeing the 100. I hope that 2020 will remain the short form that's recognised throughout the world, and one that's played and is successful throughout the world. But what I hope most of all is that Test cricket is still alive and flourishing, and that the England team are still not collapsing and losing Test matches.
Yes, well, me too. I can't see cricket going away, but yeah, it's. No. It's certainly. I personally don't think the 100 will survive. I think it will either get dropped or just reformatted, or something will happen. I think there's going to be too much. People are going to see more and more the damage it's doing. Marvelous it is on the face of it, but yeah,
for the women's game, I think it was brilliant for the women's game. But I think if you had a regular TV slot, if you had all the marketing and all the effort that went into the 100, you would make a huge success of a 2020 league. Yeah. I can't see why we have to invent a new format, but we've said it so often, and we don't want to go down that road again. I think if you look at cricket, it does still have a lot going for it. There's so much doom and gloom a lot of the time. But if you were starting now, if you were inventing the game, you probably wouldn't come up with cricket, because it's a game where you can get a first baller and then your day's gone, isn't it? And that's the challenge for young people now, isn't it? When I was young, you'd happily go along when you were trying to break it up. In my case, Walthamstow third 11, you'd happily bat number 11 and not bowl and get told off in the field if ever you misfielded a ball, because that's what you did. But there's so much demand for people's time now. There's so many other attractions that it's. You've obviously got a young lad who's very good at cricket as well, and there is still the love amongst the young people, and there are still ways of making it a game that doesn't take up their whole day for them doing very little. But there are so many challenges. It's got so much going for it, and as you say, there will still be cricket. And when we are in our dotage, I still think we'll be watching good quality cricket, because the love is still there.
The wine will be there as well.
Let's hope so.
Just before you go, just one last word. As we speak, the memorial service is taking place at the MCG for the wonderful Shane Warne, and the shocking news of his passing a couple of weeks back. Would you just like to say a few words about Shane and his impact?
Well, it's one of those, you'll always remember where you were. In my case, it was sitting at the old Alan Stanford ground in Antigua, where England were playing a warm-up game. Just arrived for the last day of the warm-up game, thinking it was going to be a quiet day. And suddenly Ali Martin of The Guardian just shouted out Shane Warne, and we were saying, what? And you just can't believe it. And even now, it's extraordinary to think he's gone, isn't it? It's surreal. It's hard to put into words that he's gone at 52, and I know that there's going to be a fitting tribute to him in Melbourne today. But the greatest bowler that ever lived, the most charismatic cricketer that ever lived, pure box office. I mean, I think the reaction to his passing told you everything you needed to know. He transcended cricket. He transcended sport, didn't he? He was probably one of the best-known cricketers of all time. I had people that I didn't think had any interest in cricket contacting me saying, Shane Warne's passed away. They couldn't believe it, because they knew who he was. He was just good for the game. Now, I personally didn't think he was a very good broadcaster. I clashed with him a little bit as a media person. I wasn't one of his favourites, I don't think. I thought he was agenda-driven at times. But he was just an incredible cricket person. Always positive, always, the people who played under him and the people who knew him well just idolised and worshipped him. And truly, there'll never be another. And it's still hard to believe that he's gone at 52. It really is.
Unbelievable and shocking news. And as you say, yeah, it really was. And I was there, moment. I remember when I found out, and I thought someone was mistaken identity or whatever else, and it was someone completely non-cricket related was telling me the news. Very, very shocking. Okay, Paul, many thanks for your time. We'll let you head off to the airport and come back. Temperatures are dropping steadily here. It was warm at the weekend, but it's freezing again now. So make sure when you get back.
Luckily, I brought my coat with me. I've been carrying this coat around with me for the last 5 weeks, so it's going to come in useful for once.
Many thanks for your time, and we'll catch up soon. Safe trip back, Mr. Paul Newman from the Daily Mail.
Thanks, Darren.